So I used the word light and little in my project. The first word I'm going to talk about is light. So the word light is used 129 times. We see that right here under the count. The 5 words that are used the most in combination with the word light include room, candle, moon, struck, and table. So 21 out of the 129 times that the word light is used, it's used with one of those 5 words, and you can see them right here under collocates. Its meaning can be a greater variety of things compared to other words that have more narrow uses. Some examples include lightness of foot when describing someone's dancing abilities, when describing the hues of clouds in the sky, or using the word as a verb when referencing lighting a candle. And after scrolling through the context box in the bottom right over here, I can see that about half the time the word light is used, it's meant literally as a verb or noun. As a verb, I light this candle. As a noun, I see this room by candlelight. It's used the most frequently in the first 10th of the novel. This could be because Jane is sharing the background of her story more at the beginning, and light is such a widely descriptive term, so it would make sense that it could have a lot of application for that period in the novel. And actually, the first 4 times it's ever used are describing a ghost in Gateshead, which is her childhood home, so that accounts for some frequency there. The second section uses the word light in mostly a literal sense, especially talking about spending time in her room before bed and seeing things by way of moonlight, with the exception of Helen speaking about the word light as an antonym to the words debasement and sin, which puts the word in a conceptual instead of a literal light. Mr. Rochester in the 3rd or 4th section refers to an angel of light while masquerading as a gypsy. And this, in combination with Helen's use of the word, shows me that the word light has positive connotations that deal with spiritual purity and almost inherent goodness. That brings to mind old Western movies where the bad guy always wears black clothing and the good guy always dresses in like a white or lighter color. And it's just part of our language that carries with it a strong association. So near the end, around the 8th section, we use the word light again, kind of like a spirit or ghost that is leading Jane away from Thornfield. And it's again with the spiritual connotation, it's regarded more as a guardian angel, and Jane calls this light her forlorn hope as she allows it to lead her through marshes and bogs as she travels on her own. I don't know really where it is. Here we go. If I click right here, it will come up in the middle section. She's talking about the light that all of a sudden kind of sprang up, and it leads her to her next chapter of life with the St. John family, actually. And the final 2 sections of the novel do go over the fire incident at Thornfield Hall, so use of the word light is often lent to describe the blaze of the fire there. So the second word I went over is the word little. Little. It's used 341 times in Jane Eyre. It's one of its most popular words. It's actually the 4th most popular word, as we can see over here. The 5 words that it's used the most in common with include girl, Adele, Jane, said, and child, which makes a lot of sense because little is often used to describe child or girl, and Adele is a little girl and Jane was one at the beginning of the novel. Its meaning, unlike the word light, has a fairly specific definition to it. So there's not a lot of different ways that the word is used typically, and is a common descriptive word used for Jane by Jane herself as she gives an account of her life in this autobiography. Running through the context box in the bottom right allows me to see how the word is used in general, which is to describe the size or amount of something. It's used most frequently in the first and third sections of the book. During these portions of the novel, Jane is either at Gateshead or Lowood School. There's many children at the school, which greatly explain its higher frequency of use there. And the reason for the greater usage in the first section is most likely because Jane is at Gateshead and Bronte is just going into depth describing Jane's background, and the word little is a common descriptive term that she just churns out multiple times per chapter. There's a significant drop in the word use in the fourth section, as we see right here, perhaps because Jane is newly established at Thornfield Hall. There's only one little girl around, which is Adele, and the focus of the novel in this area is to show the developing relationship between Mr. Rochester and Jane. And the other slightly more significant drop is in the seventh section. This drops the reader in the point of the book just before the wedding. So during this section, Jane and a small crowd basically are dragged up to see the real Mrs. Rochester. So Mr. Rochester goes on his long explanation of things and how she came to be there. And the word little really doesn't have much to do with the severity of Bertha's mental issues or the extent of how awful that situation has now become for Jane or Mr. Rochester or the staff or anybody. There's a sprinkling of the word used in the typical context of size or amount, but that's about it. And the frequency doesn't pick much back up for the remainder of the book, as we can see from the trends in the rest of the graph right here. Now, the word little is significant because it embodies Jane's gentle spirit as well as the slow process of the novel. She doesn't jump around from one life circumstance to the next, with the exception of running away after finding about Mrs. Rochester, of course. She really is an antithesis to her demure, unassuming outward appearance, in that while she can break down and cry sometimes and feel pain like everyone else, she really does have a core of strength and fortitude because she leans back on her Christian faith. So she may be small and little, but is in fact an actually very courageous person. We see that in her leaving Lowood School. Not many people with few options in those days would leave a safe, guaranteed position to go off into the great unknown, so to speak, when she applied for the position at Thornfield. Ultimately, Jane reminds me of that Shakespeare quote, "Though she be but little, she is fierce." And Jane is little, but Jane is definitely fierce.